All right, welcome back. I don't have any yellow markers, so Red Bull, unless you want to sponsor me, I won't be able to fully draw your logo. But regardless, welcome back. We're going to be doing another TI11 team preview, this time for a two-time TI champion franchise. We've been doing this from the bottom of the DPC all the way up. We are now all the way to our second place team internationally, the Kings of Western Europe over this past year, and that is, of course, OG. And this is a brand new iteration of OG, much different from the teams that we saw in the past that were TI champions back at TI8 and TI9. Although it feels like these guys do still kindle that same kind of fire and magic that team had, especially when we see them play in a playoff bracket, which in previous iterations of OG, of course, with No Tail, Seb, Jerax, Onan, Thompson, although they always succeeded at TI, it seemed like outside of that, they always struggled. They always had a hard time getting to majors. They had a hard time getting those invitations. But no matter how poorly they did throughout the past year, when TI came around, they were always a threat. And so for this iteration of OG, it's pretty interesting to see that now that they're actually able to make it into those playoffs, they are still a threat. And it still feels like that spirit of the original OG is still within them, despite the fact that none of the original members are currently playing for this roster. Taking a look at this roster now, of course, we have many new names. All three of the core players, I should say, have actually never even played in TI qualifiers before. These guys are relatively unproven up until this point, if you could even say that. From a TI perspective, that is. Of course, they have definitely built themselves up quite a resume over this past year. But it's pretty remarkable that these guys came in to the scene in one of the most competitive upper divisions in the entire DPC, Western Europe, where we've seen teams just get absolutely thrashed and sent down to the lower division, that these guys came in as relative no-names and they just completely took over. It wasn't immediate. It did take some time, but once they got there, they proved that they were not a team to be taken lightly, which was really nice to see. Uragi position 1, BZM playing position 2, my personal favorite player of the roster. When he takes over a game, it is truly a sight to behold. We then have the fan favorite Amar playing the off lane, familiar face Taiga from previous team Liquid, and before that Alliance. This will be his second TI. His furthest run of TI was, of course, losing in the best of ones back at TI9 with Team Liquid with the infamous gyro ban. And then we have Misha coming in playing position 5, who up until this season had been OG's coach for a few years up until that point. And the closest he has ever been to TI himself, because this is also going to be his first as a player, was finishing second in the TI8 qualifiers with Espada. Their coach Shubash, this will be his first international as well. He has not been all that close either, finishing 5th and 8th place at the TI8 qualifiers with Empire. So, taking a look at their results over the past year. Kicking things off with Tour 1, they finished 4th place, and that is after some tiebreakers. They did lose their best of 1 in those tiebreakers to Tundra, who absolutely demolished the tiebreakers, but they still took out teams like Team Secret and Enigma Galaxy to secure themselves a spot in the top 4. It was a little too bad that there wasn't a major in Tour 1. They would have qualified, but regardless, in the regional finals, they still qualified for that, where they did have a little bit of a rough time. They get knocked out in the second round of the lower bracket by Gaming Gladiators. They go 1 and 2, but most notably, they didn't come last. That was actually Tundra, which was a huge disappointment for Tundra at the time. For OG, it was more just, at least they didn't come last. Heading into Tour 2, however, they immediately picked up a ton of momentum, finishing first place in the region, a 6-1 record, earning themselves 400 DPC points and a ticket to the Stockholm Major, where they would end up winning the entire tournament. Yes, due to complications with the ongoing situation in Ukraine and Russia, we had Seb coming in and standing in, and he had a fantastic performance throughout the entire thing. Of course, his Wind Ranger became rather infamous throughout the entire thing. No Tail came in to coach as well. And yeah, they went on a miracle run, losing in the first round of the upper bracket, but then winning 6 straight series to a major title, going 6-1 on the main stage, 680 more DPC points. And in Tour 3, they would end up finishing 3rd place in the region, 5-2 record, still pretty good, 200 more DPC points, and they would qualify to Arlington, where they would have a pretty similar run to the one that they had in Stockholm. Not quite as miraculous, not quite as far. This time it was with the full roster. They go 3-3-2 in the group stage, and they would win 1 series in the upper bracket, get dropped down, win 1 more, and then eventually get knocked out. But regardless, a top 4 finish at Arlington, 590 many more DPC points. Again, you can see it here. OG is not a team to be taken lightly on the main stage of a major. Taking a look at the results now against teams attending this year's International, they played a total of 97 games against other teams attending this year's TI. That is the most that we've seen by far, and it's the most that we will see for any team attending this year's TI by far. Taking a look at Tour 1, again, it wasn't exactly pretty. They would win their first series against Team Secret, but then past that point, they would follow that up with losses to Liquid, Gaming Gladiators, and then they would lose to Tundra twice in a row, the first time in the Tour, the second time in those tiebreakers, but they would beat Team Secret in those tiebreakers. In the regional finals, they would lose to Team Liquid in the first round. They would then knock out Team Tundra in the first round of the lower bracket before getting knocked out by Gaming Gladiators, who at that point were on their way to a regional final championship. Tour 2, we'd see a quick turnaround from Tour 1 to Tour 2 where they would knock out teams like Liquid, Tundra, and Entity, dropping a series to Team Secret, which was like the complete opposite of Tour 1, but it was still progress. They go to Stockholm and they take down Beast Coast in the group stage, same thing for EG and BetBoom. They draw against Boom and they would lose to T1 and Tundra in the group stage, but on the main stage, they lose that first round of TSM FTX, that drops them down, and they go on a dream run, beating Boom, Fnatic, Thunder Awaken, Gaming Gladiators, Tundra, and then eventually a rematch against TSM FTX in the grand finals, which they would win in 4 games. A miraculous run, and again, it is just a bunch of super talented teams that they knocked out on the way there. Quite remarkable, especially with a stand-in. You might say that Seb isn't much of a stand-in in comparison to like the standard definition for a stand-in. He's obviously a TI champion, but he truly took over, and it was a fantastic tournament for OG there. Tour 3, they would take out Secret, Entity, and Gaming Gladiators, losing series to Tundra and Liquid, so falling back a little bit, but still finishing top 3 in the upper division of Western Europe. Quite fantastic. At Arlington, they would tie their series against Fnatic, Liquid, and Sonics in the group stage. They would lose to PSG.LGD and VP in the group stage, but they would take wins over RNG, Thunder, and Talon. And on the main stage, they would knock Entity down to the lower bracket. They would eventually get knocked down themselves by PSG.LGD to the lower bracket. They would eventually knock out Beast Coast before getting knocked out themselves by Aster in the lower bracket semifinals. So again, even though they don't end off with a major win, they still finish top 4, and it is a hell of a run that they have put together where a majority of their points came from majors, which is not something that you can say for a whole lot of teams, most notably teams like Thunder Awaken, who truly crushed their own region but did have their struggles at lands. That's kind of the opposite for OG, with some good results within their own regions mixed in there as well. Taking a look at some stats across the entire DPC this past year, they've played a total of 113 games. Again, the most that we've seen of any team so far, and it is due to those deep runs in tournaments. They go 72-41 in those 113 games. On Radiant, they are 27-18, and on Dire, they're 45-23, so heavily favoring Dire side there when it comes to the sheer volume of matches. On First Pick, they're 24-15. On Last Pick, they're 48-26. On Radiant First Pick, they're 18-9 for a 67% win rate. Radiant Second Pick, however, that does come down quite a bit, but it's a much lower amount of games that go 9-7. Same thing for Dire First Pick, 6-5, and on Dire Last Pick, 39-18. So you can see that they were heavily going for Dire Last Pick in most of their games. 68% win rate on that orientation. Very impressive. In games that were less than 40 minutes, they were 48-27, and in games that were longer than that, they kept that consistency, going 24-14, a nearly identical win percentage there. Game 1s, they were 33-19. Game 2s, they were 32-17. And in Game 3s, they fared just above 50% there with a 6-5 record for a 55% win rate. For average GPM, they sat at a 23.19, average XPM of 28.54, an average KDA of 3.74, and an average match duration of 36 minutes and 21 seconds. For hero stats now across those 113 games, they picked a total of 89 different heroes, their most picked being Razor and Puck with 25 and 23 picks respectively. That makes a whole lot of sense. BZM's Puck has been fantastic this past year, and Razor was one of those staple heroes that they pretty much ran in any of the cold roles, and it made it incredibly difficult for teams to draft against them. Not only that, but the hero was also incredibly strong this past year, so it makes a lot of sense. Wind Ranger picked 19 times, and if you want to make a guess of how many of those were Seb at the major, you can go ahead. I'll leave you guys a few seconds to write your guesses down in the comments. It was a high percentage. I'll give you that as a hint. I'll reveal that number once I finish up with the heroes here. Mars, 18 picks. Timbersaw with 16, of course, and Amar Classic, and Enigma with 14. Their best heroes being Pangolier, who went 5-0, Templar Assassin, who went 8-1, Dragon Knight went 7-1, Storm Spirit 10-3, the BZM Storm Spirit, another classic of his, as well as Kunkka, which I'm surprised didn't show up on here. Timbersaw 12-4, so ATF quite good on that Timbersaw in case you guys didn't already know. And then Hoodwink 4-0. For their worst heroes, Shadow Shaman went 1-3, Weaver went 2-4, which is a little surprising given how strong that hero was at the start of the DPC season, and Huskar, who went 2-4. For their most banned, they banned a total of 99 different heroes. Beastmaster with 51, which is a ridiculously high number. I know that these guys have played more matches than a lot of other teams here, but we have not seen any numbers even close to 51 for bans. They just did not want to have anything to do with Beastmaster this past year. Rightfully so. That hero is pretty annoying, especially once he gets that Helm of the Overlord, but still, 51 bans, Tiny with 34, and Death Prophet with 27. And if you're curious now for how many of those games were played by Seb, it was 13 of the 19 played by Seb. So fair to say that I don't think we'll be seeing very much Wind Ranger from OG heading into this year's International unless Seb has some miraculous stand-in once again. And yeah, that pretty much does it for OG. And now I pass the question off to you. Where does OG go? How do these players live up to the expectations of this grand franchise who has amassed so much success in the past? At first, they were crushing every major, but faltering at TI. Then they were just faltering at every major, but winning every TI. And now with a brand new roster, they are crushing the DPC. Slowly but surely, they work themselves up to the top of the DPC. But what does that mean for TI? What does that mean for their run? Will they continue to have dominant runs where they're making it consistently to the top 4 to the last few days of the tournament? Or is the nerves going to get to them? Again, a lot of members of this team have never been to a TI before, Taiga being the only one, and he has only been once when he lost in the best of ones back at TI9. So a lot of nerves on this team, I'd imagine. But again, if these guys have shown us anything, is that they can overcome expectations, and I'm hoping that they can do that and put on a great show at this tournament. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you missed any of my other previews, check out the link in the description as well as the link to our Discord. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'll be having my final preview, excluding teams from the Last Chance qualifiers, going up in a few hours. That is going to be on the champions of the DPC season this past year, PSG.LGD, the favorite by most heading into this year's International. So if you don't want to miss that, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll talk to you guys later.